Hi everyone, Justine Lizzie here. I'm an intuitive reader and teacher. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I help sensitive and awakened souls intuitively navigate this crazy world. And one of the ways I do it is I talk a lot about awakenings and ascending and up-leveling and however you want to say it. And that actually goes into why I'm making this video, is because there are different terms when it comes to awakenings that a lot of people get kind of confused about. And like, for example, I'm going to be actually tackling these three terms. So I'm going to be tackling spiritual awakening, Kundalini experience, and then dark night of the soul. So you've probably heard those three types of phrases and ways to explain waking up. And from my experience, back in 2013, which is 7 years ago now, I actually had my own awakening and Kundalini experience. Again, I didn't actually know what was happening to me at that particular time. I actually thought that I was developing schizophrenia. I was going crazy. I thought I was going to be committed. I thought I was being punished. There were so many different things that were happening to me, and I really kind of kept it to myself because I wasn't connected with anybody that has gone through these experiences before. So that's actually one of my first tips, and I'll be throwing tips throughout the video, is that please, while you're going through this, connect with like-minded people that understand what is happening. I would actually recommend not going to a therapist. Again, I'm not a doctor, and some people really think that therapists really help them a lot. That is totally fine, but they're probably not going to understand what is happening to you and the symptoms that are happening to you, because it's not a psychological issue. It's an energy and emotional and spiritual transformation that's happening internally. You look completely normal on the outside, but you have all of this stuff happening on the inside, so it can be really scary. And not to mention, mine was super intense. A lot of people go through their awakenings and things like that very slowly or gradually over time. They decide to try meditation one day, and then they try it again the next day, and then all of a sudden, they keep awakening in that type of way. For myself, and I've heard other people, is that it happens right off the bat. It happens very intense. I remember going to sleep one way and waking up another. It was super scary. So that is what that is where I come in, is that I really want to make sure that you guys are supported and that you guys have enough information about this, because I feel like it's not talked about enough, because it's almost like not everybody experiences it, right? I was blessed enough to experience it, although at the time I felt like, again, I was being punished, and it felt really awful, and it felt really painful, and it felt very terrifying. But at the end of the day, I came out the end of the tunnel a brand new person, and I feel really, really good, and I feel really blessed that I was able to have this experience. So I'm going to be tackling each one, and again, those are spiritual awakening, Kundalini experience, and dark night of the soul. And really coming from my perspective and my spiritual philosophy. Totally okay if you don't agree. Hopefully most of it will resonate with you guys. You guys have to put your stuff in the comments so I can know, and we can have a dialogue and have a conversation. But I would love to hear your perspective and your views, and I do want to see if it resonates with you guys. So I'm going to be tackling really the main questions with each of these: who, what, when, how, why, and all that good stuff. So it's a lot to cover, so I'm jumping right into it now. Okay, so let's start with the classic spiritual awakening. So you hear people say, I'm going through a spiritual awakening, I went through a spiritual awakening. Again, it can be gradual, and it can be intense, but it can be over time, okay? So it can be. So basically, who goes through a spiritual awakening? That's the first question that we'll tackle. So really, I came up with anyone who is whose soul is tired, who's tired of their own bullshit, and they're tired of untruths. And basically what I mean by that is that they know that the truth is out there, and they know that this can't be it. Almost like their soul is tired. Like they might be at jobs that they hate, they might be in relationships that are abusive, they might be in family dynamics that are abusive. It usually, from my experience in talking to hundreds of people over during my entire awakening, is that it almost seems like everybody is completely misaligned, and then their awakening happens. And that was true for me. Again, I was in an abusive relationship. I was personally destroying myself with alcohol, driving drunk, getting in trouble, getting arrested. And also my family life, I wasn't close with them. And then I was in an industry that I didn't like. It was so misaligned. There was nothing about it that brought any purpose or passion or fulfilled me in any type of way. So, combining all of those, that's exactly why I believe I had my spiritual awakening. The other thing, too, and if you've watched my videos, is that you know that I come from a spiritual perspective that everything is a choice. God has given us free will. Thank God, right? Everything is a choice. I hear a lot in the spiritual community that the spiritual awakenings that you've had, especially the ones that are super intense, and I'm also guilty of it, is that we say that we didn't have a choice with it. The truth is, our soul was calling out for it for many years. And if I can really be honest with myself and truthful with myself, I can look back and realize I went to bed every single night praying to something, praying for help, praying for, I wanted to see, I needed knowledge. I just felt very, very lost, very, very ungrounded, just completely out of place with my life, and I just needed help. And all of those years combined, do not underestimate the power of prayer. I asked for it, and most of our souls ask for it. All of our souls ask for it, right? Because the universe can't give us anything that we don't ask for. So deep down, if you really look at it, I would say you definitely wanted it. Maybe not, the how is always confusing when you want something from the universe, right? So like once you declare it and you desire it, the universe provides the how. So in this way, I didn't expect it in this particular fashion, but this is how it happened, right? But I did ask for it, okay? Okay, so what is it? What is a spiritual awakening? Like, what is it? So the best thing that I could come up with to define it in human terms is basically it's the unlearning. It's awakening to the truth, and the truth including who you are. As in essence, you are love. You actually don't get it from anywhere else, which is something that I was taught, is that I need to get it from other people, or I need to get it from external circumstances, relationships, validation from parents, like things like that, lots of friends, all of that stuff. The truth is, that is completely false, right? And that's the kind of stuff that unravels as you're unlearning during this process. So that's really kind of what it is. It's a huge consciousness shift, I went to bed one night thinking one particular way, and I woke up the next day thinking completely different. I remember feeling like it was a light bulb that literally was turned on overnight. Like a part of my brain actually turned on. It was really scary. It was really freaky. But again, I had to just roll with it, and I couldn't really tell anybody because I'm like, what is happening? It's very crazy. But it happened, right? And unlearning is just the best word I can use to describe of what it actually is. When does it happen? Okay, so again, I kind of touched on this a little bit. And by the way, I'm using my notes, guys, so I don't miss anything. But basically, when does it happen? It really kind of happens when you're at a breaking point. It really kind of happens when you are in extreme trauma. With a few different things. That was my experience. It happens with, I've heard of childbirth. It happened during childbirth. Near-death experiences is another popular way that people have awakenings. Abuse, trauma, like I said, gradually over time. And basically when it happened, what I believe when it happens gradually over time is that this was your karma. This is your lifetime to wake up. It just is. It is what it is. You've actually signed that contract before you got here, right, guys? Do we believe in soul contracts? We always sign a soul contract to get here, and within that contract, I agreed to waking up at 27. To jump into astrology a little bit, and the moon cycles, I'm not an expert. I never claimed to be an expert, but basically around 27, I think it's like 26 possibly. And again, if you're super into astrology and you want to throw some information about this, please do. Around 26 to about 30-ish, 31-ish, we start to have our first Saturn return, which is, again, I'm not an astrologist, but basically every 20, like I said, 26 to 30 years, we kind of have a huge up level of our lives. And that's just, and it has to do with the planetary alignment. So most people that I've talked to have had that experience around those ages, a spiritual awakening around those ages. So it makes sense. Again, I was 26 going on to 27, so the start of my Saturn return. Also, I forgot to mention, addiction is also another way people have awakenings, like the end of their rope with addictions, and suicide attempts, and and I guess we can put those all into trauma, but I just thought of it and I didn't want to leave it out. So yeah, that's the when. Okay, so let's jump into the how. I've already kind of touched on this. Could happen gradually over time. Could happen intensely because of those reasons that I just mentioned. But that's how it happens. It doesn't happen really kind of any other way. So I think I beat the dead horse on that. Okay, so why? Why does it happen? I've already kind of touched on this as well. It's really to evolve your consciousness level. I was extremely unconscious, and I was extremely living in the false self of Justine. I was so misaligned, and it woke me the hell up right overnight. Like I said, it's really kind of an activation of your higher self. It is a self-actualization process, right? So I had to be stripped of the ego so I can learn who my higher self was, and that's really the process of self-actualization, right? Who am I? Asking these questions, realizing that there are two parts of yourself, right? You are not all your ego, and you're not all your higher self. You're in a human body right now, having a human experience where you have to work with both. That was mind-blowing on its own. But yeah, we already kind of covered the why, all of those reasons. If you've had a near-death experience, I love people's comments about that. Like, it is so fascinating to me. NDEs, they're called. So if you've experienced one, please put it in the comments. I'd love to hear your experience. Okay, so that's an awakening, right? So really intense. And why it's intense, I keep using the word intense, is, again, our ego is stripped from us, but also everything that we believe to be true about the world and how the world works gets completely taken from us, where we're like, wow, everything is super false. This is so crazy. And it's really kind of uncovering limiting beliefs and false beliefs about the world. And that is super hard, because it's about change. You have to change your whole outlook on life. It's almost like you're pushed into it. It's very, very, very tough. It's very intense. All right, let's move into Kundalini experience. So this one is something I didn't really realize I was going through. I kind of caught on maybe like within the first month or two that I was going through a spiritual awakening, but I didn't really understand I was going through a Kundalini experience until maybe 2 years after. And by the way, my Kundalini stayed with me for 5.5 years, which is nuts. So nuts. I've actually heard people having their Kundalini energy for 10, 11 years, like it being activated for 10, 11 years, which is nuts. That is so crazy. Light and love to you for surviving that. But basically, a Kundalini experience, so let's jump into it. So what is it? Let's start with what, and then we'll go to the who. What is it? It is dormant energy that lies in the base of the spine, right underneath the root chakra, if you're familiar with the chakra systems. And I'm actually going to talk about the chakra system, so I'll go ahead and explain it. But basically what happens is that once it gets activated, it shoots up through your body, through the crown, which is that seventh highest chakra that is the connection to God, universe, source, our guides, however you want to say it. It shoots right through your body. It's intense. It's almost like people can feel it. There are physical symptoms with this. I remember my spine was on fire and I had no freaking idea why. It was itchy. I was sweating every single night. It didn't matter what the temperature was. I was completely open. And this is actually where I discovered my gifts, you guys, is that I was completely connected to the universe and completely connected to my psychic and intuitive gifts. It was insane. So this is the part where it gets kind of crazy, is that I was actually seeing, I was waking up every single night at 3 o'clock in the morning. I was experiencing heavily intuitive dreams. I was having spirits come to me, talk to me in dreams. I would feel other people's energies tenfold. Like, I knew I actually couldn't live alone at the time. I had to move back in with my mom at 27 because I couldn't be alone. I was too freaked out. Everybody was trying to communicate. All the spirits were trying to communicate to me at the same time. Imagine like this happening overnight. It was crazy. I had no idea what was happening. It was very, 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 very scary. So yeah, this is another way why I can say it's intense, right? That's a good reason. And a lot of different things like that happen to you. Okay, let's move into who it happens to. So again, a lot of the same reasons that you have an awakening, that this happens to you. I also want to add that I found out not too long ago, maybe like a year or two ago, that people actually try to actively activate it. They literally try to. I'm actually not huge on yoga, to be honest. I did a lot of yoga when I was going through my Kundalini to move the energy around my body, but there's a yoga move, there's Kundalini yoga, like where people are trying to activate it. I thought that was so crazy. I'm like, who would actually want this? Who would want to activate this? This is nuts. But people want to be enlightened, and people want to have a consciousness shift, which I get. Now I get. But at the time, I'm like, who would actually go through this? Who would actually want to actively go through this? But instead of it happening spontaneously, right? So that is who it happens to. And again, all the other things match, where, trauma of some kind, a spiritual awakening obviously could activate it. The whole, everything included in what I said about spiritual awakening. And then on top of that, what I want to add is that the Kundalini really has to do with the chakra system, and also an imbalance in the chakra system, and also a suppression in energy and emotions. So this is where Kundalini comes in when it comes to emotions. When that energy shot up my spine, I released every emotion that I have ever suppressed in my life pretty much at the same time. I was forced to deal with grief. I was forced to deal with anger. I was forced to feel the breakups I never actually felt. I was forced to feel all the feelings at one particular time. It was so intense. And by the way, guys, I also had a full-time job that I was trying to be as normal as possible around other people at the same time. So all of this stuff is like happening within you, and you're like trying to be as normal as possible, and it's like super hard. Especially when you don't know what's happening to you at the time. But basically, I had to purge all of my emotions. So on top of an awakening, with all of those things that happen to you during the awakening of why it happens to you, this is also, if you've suppressed your feelings for many, many years, which I have done for 27 years of my life. I have suppressed my emotions. So I had to deal with all of those things. And my chakras were completely imbalanced. So I'm not going to go into a complete chakra education here, but basically we have 7 main ones, starting with the crown all the way down to the root. They all represent a different type of energy. So meaning, I already mentioned crown, that is connection to consciousness, to God, to universe, source energy, however you want to say it, or guides, however you want to define your higher power, right? If that is blocked, we do not have any faith in something bigger than ourselves. And that was me, right? I always identified as atheist. I never relied on anything bigger than myself. In a way, I was always pretty spiritual, where like I told you that story, I was praying for this awakening. I was, and I wasn't really conscious that I was actually praying. And then I was practicing some law of attraction without actually defining it, right? So that was a connection to something bigger than myself too. So even though I defined myself as atheist, even just defining it and just kind of closing myself off. And by the way, I was super turned off with religion. So that was the other thing, that it was closed since I left Catholic school. So I didn't want anything to do with God. I didn't even want to use the word. I was actually uncomfortable when all of this was happening for me to actually use the word God. So I stuck with universe. I definitely fluidly use universe and God these days, because my God doesn't belong to a religion. And I know that now. But for example, if that is blocked, then you don't have a healthy, balanced crown chakra. Same with third eye. I was blocking all of my gifts. So when the Kundalini shot through the top, through my third eye, all of my intuitive gifts came flooding out. And again, I had no boundaries. I had so many psychic attacks. It was pretty nuts. I'll probably do a video about that. But it was pretty crazy. It was crazy. And you don't want to walk around with imbalanced chakras. It's so important. There are so many energy healers that are out there that do chakra balancing and things like that. And it's so important to be conscious of what doesn't feel right in your body, what feels imbalanced in your life. And I remember when this was happening to me, that I was like, oh my God, something feels so imbalanced, like, but I don't know how to define it. Like, it's almost like I felt my chakras, which are, I forget what they call it, but they're on a different plane, right? They're not in the body per se. They're actually a little bit outside of the body. They're on, and if anybody knows that word, please drop it below. But I kind of knew what they were before even knowing what they were. Like, I could feel them before I knew, basically. So it was very interesting. So I wanted to add that in. Okay, so we did the who it happens to, what it is. Okay, when it happens, we already kind of covered that already. How it happens, I already kind of described it. That was in the what a bit. It is activated, and then it shoots up the energy through your body. There are physical symptoms with it. I also recently found out that there is something called krivas, where people activate it and they get like their hands are stuck because the energy is like flowing through, or their body is stuck in some way and the energy is just flowing freely through, and they don't really have control over their body. I did not experience that personally, but that is also something I have read and talked to people that has happened. Again, my spine felt on fire. I was always hot. I was sweating overnight, even sleeping in like the coldest temperatures. What else? I felt tired a lot because, guys, a lot of energy is moving through your body. I was sleeping 10 to 11 hour days. I was trying not to socialize. I was isolating mostly because of the healing work happening. Yeah, there are some physical symptoms with it as well. I'm curious to see if anybody else wants to add to those physical symptoms, so please put them in the comments below. So basically, to sum that up, Kundalini experience is more focused on the healing part of things. So basically, I look at the spiritual awakening as the unlearning, and then I kind of look at the Kundalini with the healing. Now, to connect the two of them, I had them both at the same time. I almost want to say my spiritual awakening activated my Kundalini, because I couldn't do the purging of the emotions and the balancing of the chakras without and the mastering of my gifts without the trigger of the awakening, right? You can't be awake, and you can't be conscious of these you can't be unconscious of yourself and your essence and your higher self without actually working through your issues and purging your emotions and things like that. So I really believe that that's connected in that way. Can people not have a Kundalini experience with an awakening? Absolutely. But I feel like the awakening is the base of it all. Like, you have to, like, people mostly have an awakening. The Kundalini is kind of the bonus, right? I don't know if I want to use the word bonus, though, because it wasn't, am I glad that it happened? Yes. But again, super intense, super scary. So I don't know if bonus is the word to use, but I think you kind of get where I'm going with this. But yeah, so it's not necessarily everybody that has a spiritual awakening has a Kundalini. But I believe people that do have a Kundalini have had a spiritual awakening, right? Okay, so now let's move on to the third thing. And this is called the dark night of the soul. You've heard this term, I'm sure. And at first, I thought it was similar to, people just use it interchangeably with spiritual awakening. And I could get on board with that, because it is dark. And it is a dark night for the soul. And one thing that didn't resonate with me and why I decided to dive deeper on this topic is that I didn't actually, even though everything that happened to me was like pretty intense, I didn't go through a period of depression in some way. It was actually the opposite. During my awakening and my Kundalini, it was, very painful emotions you had to work through, but I never felt depressed, and I never felt apathetic, and I never felt like very low vibrational feelings about the whole experience. I didn't feel that. I do see people reporting that they go through a massive depression when they go through their awakening, because I can get that, right? We're unlearning so much. Like, your whole life is turned upside down. What you believe to be true is not true anymore. And you see the reality of the truth of life. And the way the universe works. So I see how people can go to depression, but I never went through that. It was always feelings of euphoria, probably because I was so connected to the universe and I was so connected to love. And that, I was super positive. I was super out there. A lot of people were like, what happened to you? You're so spacey. You're just out there. And I was just a free spirit, just trying to work through what I was feeling. And it was really generally euphoric the entire time. For myself, when I heard this dark night of the soul, and I actually recently went through one because I have gone through another awakening of some kind. So basically, before I jump into this, let me also answer the question that I've always had, is that, can this stuff repeat? Can you have another awakening? Can you have another Kundalini? I don't know the answer to, can you have another Kundalini? I'm assuming no, because once the energy is released, and you worked out how to manage your own feelings, and to express them, there's no need for, it's not possible for another Kundalini to happen to you. Awakenings are different, because I feel like everybody has one giant one, and then that changes their whole perspective. And then as they go on in living life, they tend to have other awakenings as well. And basically that could be just a consciousness shift of some kind. Like, that's how small it could be on a smaller scale, is that shifting your perspective and your perception. So I do believe, yes, throughout your life, you're going to continuously have, especially a very, very conscious person who I feel like I am, very self-aware. I'm not I'm not completely enlightened. I'm human at the same time, but I will continue to experience awakenings, even though I had a massive awakening 7 years ago. So to say that, I also just recently had a DNA activation, which is a type of induced awakening, an up-leveling and an ascension process, and a healing process and an unlearning process. It's really another way. And I'm not going to go into the video about defining it, but it actually activated, I'm not going to be defining the DNA activation because I'm not a practitioner and I'm not an expert, but once I had this done a few weeks back, I moved into something that I would actually define as a dark night of the soul. So let's get into this. So what is a dark night of the soul? A dark night of the soul it's more of like questioning everything that you learned from your awakening, like questioning your spiritual life, questioning every single move, and not in a good way, questioning it in a negative way, right? Like, when we go through an awakening, we question everything and we're like, oh wow, I'm unlearning here, and that's not true, and that's not the truth. This is more about questioning from the ego's point of view, from an egoic place, right? Where we can put ourselves in a depression saying like, well, what am I doing with my life? Like, it's basically like, when you go on this path of awakening, you really kind of set yourself up for alignment, right? Because you learn about flow, and you learn about intuition, and you learn about really using those gifts to move more into a life that feels aligned for you. But then there comes a time, and it could definitely happen years later, where you're like, okay, now what? And especially since the high of the, I call it the high of because it's like such high vibrational energy of the Kundalini left me about a year and a half ago now. I haven't had that intense euphoric energy for a really long time. So I'm actually susceptible to the dark night of the soul. That again is it feels like a spiritual apathy or a spiritual depression of some time where the ego is coming in, because here it is again, and it is making you question everything. So that's now that I say it out loud, that seems like the major difference is that the spiritual awakening is the taking away of the ego, and I feel like the dark night of the soul is the ego really going under attack, and really being present, and really making you question everything. So again, it's not backed by love, it's backed by ego. Who does this happen to? It happens to people, spiritual people that have gone through their awakenings, but again are hitting walls, are misaligned, but they haven't been conscious of it. They are just very lost again. And I do notice as well it happens with imposter syndrome. When you're about to have a breakthrough, it could come through, and the ego could try to sabotage you, right? Because what is the main goal of the ego, right? The ego is here to keep us safe. And that's the only thing, right? It's here to keep us safe and keep us comfortable, right? So it doesn't like growth at all. So keeping you safe, keeping you content, like that kind of thing. When does it happen? I believe, again, this is from my experience, it happens when you have when you start to have imposter syndrome, many years after your original awakening, a misaligned path or many misaligned paths, questioning yourself, that kind of thing. Okay, how does it happen? It feels like a bout of depression. It feels like a feeling of hopelessness. It feels like apathy. Apathy, I use that word a lot because I felt a lot of it before my spiritual awakening, is that I always kind of just felt I didn't really care about anything in life, where it was just mutual and it was just, I didn't care. I was bored a lot. I'm like never bored ever now. But it's almost like it's confusing. It's like very, very confusing energy, and it's just like blah, nothing. It's pretty much like the opposite of passionate, right? So it feels like that. It feels like that. I also want to add that I feel like the dark night of the soul happens to us when it's time to integrate, and it's when it's time to integrate both ego and soul, and higher self together, to go forward in life. So that could be the crash could kind of be really confusing, and it could definitely be very apathetic for sure. Okay, why does it happen? Again, I kind of touched on it a little bit, why it happens. I did it a few times already, but it just, again, it feels like it's almost like a battle between the higher self and the ego, but it feels like it's very ego-driven, and we have to integrate, and we have to figure out a way where our ego and our higher self can coexist. And how we can move through this energy. Well, that's a good question, right? Like, how do we move through this energy? At least for me, I've been giving myself a break. I know that I just did an intense energy healing, and I understand that there is a lot of energy going on in my body. I can feel it. I have physical symptoms from this DNA activation, but for the most part, I'm just trying to be easy on myself and let it ride, while understanding what I'm going through and making sure that I am being easy on myself, because again, I know what the ego is trying to do. Its job. It's just trying to do its job. So I'm very, very been very kind of easy on myself as well, and kind of letting it pass. I don't know. As far as I know, sometimes it's like every day is different, but people can go through a dark night of the soul for as long as it takes. I don't want to put a time limit on this. I mean, I don't really want to put a time limit on anything. Even though I feel like my Kundalini lasted about 5.5 years, I could say. And again, people have Kundalinis for 10, 11 years. That energy stays with you as long as you keep healing. As long as there's still stuff to heal, it'll continue to be there, right? It doesn't leave you until the healing is gone. Technically we're never really super healed from anything, but again, it comes for a reason. Once that reason is fulfilled, it will leave, right? So it's not exactly a time limit on it. So to sum this up, I would definitely put the dark night of the soul in the category of empowerment. And why I would do that is because once you kind of get out of it, after the integration of the shadow self, of the ego, of the higher self, you can move on in a better direction. Like, I often find that it comes, and what I'm experiencing and what I intuitively believe is that it comes right before a huge breakthrough in your life, or about to do something really, really scary. Because again, the ego tries to keep us safe, so it's trying to keep us back, right? So I do find that that does happen. Okay, so we're nearing the end of the video. That is my definitions and my breakdown of a spiritual awakening, a Kundalini experience, and a dark night of the soul. So if you've heard those words and you're not sure if you've experienced, or if you're experiencing something right now and you're not sure what you can define it as, hopefully this video will help. The last thing that I want to leave you guys with is that it's not always, I like labels because, and I know many spiritual people don't like labels. I totally understand that. I like labels because it helps me with a better understanding of what's happening to me, and that's how I learn, and that's how I can grasp concepts. That's also how I can forgive. So the more I can understand what's happening to me and why it's happening to me, the more I can forgive myself. Again, I mention this. I was angry with God for putting me through this. I was angry. And again, I had to deal with those emotions too. But once you understand what is happening to you to the best of your ability, you can understand why it's happening to you. And the big why for all of this is for the evolution of your consciousness, to get you where you need to go, to love yourself, to see the truth. That is so important, right? Like, we're living in a society where we don't even value the truth anymore. So all of these things happen for a reason. And if you feel like, you're going through something and you can't exactly define it, it doesn't, and even after this video, you're still a little confused because maybe one thing fits here and one thing fits there. I define it to understand and to work through my own issues, and to better understand myself and how the universe works and all that stuff. If you don't want to label it, that's totally fine. That's what I'm going to leave you with. That's totally fine. If you can't label it, that's okay. It's not about labeling it. It's really kind of about moving through it, learning from it, being easy on yourself, and all the other important things, whether it was a spiritual awakening, Kundalini experience, or dark night of the soul. I mean, at the end of the day, does it really matter? It gives you a better understanding, like I said. But not one of them is better than the other, or not one of them is less tumultuous than the other. Again, my experiences were pretty intense. My dark night of the soul is a little bit more easy on me, which is great. But everybody's different. Everybody's healing looks different. Everybody's experience looks different. But the whole point of this video was to try to give you guys some more clarity, validate your experiences, and give you some more guidance on how to work through this. I could probably do another video based on that, because there is a lot to kind of tackle on these topics. Maybe I'll make a tips video or something like that. But it's really also to make sure that you guys are not alone. I'm here to help you guys navigate these types of situations. They are, not exactly of the norm. The last thing I need, or I want, or a desire is to, by the way, I got this calling when I was going through this whole experience, is to help others with their own experience. So you're not alone. You're not crazy. You're beautiful. You are blossoming. You are healing. You are unlearning. You are you will come out empowered, and everything is going to work itself out. Cool. Okay, I've talked enough. And guys, again, if you like this video, please hit the like button. Please subscribe if you want to see more content. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns about this whole topic, please put it in the comments. I find it so fascinating to talk about this stuff all day. I'd love to hear your experiences as well. Thank you guys, and enjoy the rest of your day, okay? Bye.